Aunty Owl, your storyteller. I take pride in reading these stories in their original form. I want to spread fairy tales as they actually are, rather than as they should be when viewed by a contemporary lens. However, some of these stories are riddled with problems. Some of these problems are moral, dealing with things like bigotry, racism, and xenophobia, and some of them are just incorrect factually. Now, my goal here is not to spread stupidity or bad morals, so I've decided to put up this introduction before we actually delve into this week's story, which comes from the book Arabian Nights, or 1001 Nights Entertainments, which the publication information tells me came out in 1706. That was, at the time of this recording, 311 years ago. That's a very long time. Since then, we've come a long way as a civilization. A person today is much better educated, in better health, has more possessions, and generally has a better life than people did back then. A person from 300 years ago would have difficulty imagining all the amazing things that we have today, like vaccination to prevent diseases that would have killed them, or the device that you're listening to these stories on. Computers and smartphones would seem like magic. Sometimes I just like to take a moment to appreciate that I was born in a time period where I have all these nice things. I'm especially thankful for medicine and education. You may not like school, but in the times that Arabian Nights were published, children weren't in school unless they were very rich. Most children held dangerous jobs, and they worked for very low pay. These children would have been so thankful to go to school. In the story coming up, Aladdin, we see the titular character being berated, scolded, and looked down upon because at 15 years old, he didn't have a full-time job. Today, if Aladdin lived in my country, he would be a sophomore in high school. He might have a part-time job, but he would be working on his high school degree. He certainly wouldn't be expected to support himself. Arabian Nights is a series of stories told by a lady named Sherazade. Sherazade was a young woman, most likely a teenager herself, but, as I've said, people treated young teenagers like fully grown adults. Sherazade today would be thinking about things like getting her driver's license, passing her English test, or picking out a pretty affordable prom dress. But 300 years ago, girls had a completely different set of problems. Sherazade had just gotten married, but she hadn't gotten married to her boyfriend. Oh no, Sherazade's husband was a man named Shahryar, who was over a decade older than her, and was the king of Persia. Now, maybe you think it wouldn't be so bad to be Sherazade. Even if your husband is old, he's still a king, and even if you don't love him, you still get to be queen. But things were even worse than you think. Shahryar didn't want to be married. He had been married before, but his wife cheated on him. But because he was king, he had her and her boyfriend executed. But at the time, kings weren't allowed to be single. But Shahryar was so hurt by his wife cheating on him that he was scared that any wife would cheat on him. He let this experience make him a terrible tyrant, and he decided that he would marry because he had to, but that he would only stay married one night, and would kill his new wife in the morning before she had a chance to cheat on him. So Sherazade knew that her husband wanted to kill her, that he had planned to kill her in the morning, so she came up with a plan. She told him a story, but only part of a story. Shahryar was so curious to know the end of this story that he didn't kill her. If she was dead, she couldn't tell him the end of the story. But when she finished with the story, she started another one, and he had to wait another day to hear the end. She did this every night for 1001 nights, until she eventually won his trust, and he decided not to kill her, but to live with her, happily ever after. Sherazade may have had a scary life, but that doesn't mean that we should trust everything that she says. When I was reading Aladdin, I was horrified at some of the things that she seems to just accept that are absolutely awful. I wanted to make sure that my audience knows that these are horrible things and not to believe that they're okay just because Sherazade says they are. In the story that is coming up, there are several people who are enslaved. Of course, there are the genies, who are slaves to the person who controls their objects, but also in the story there are human beings who are slaves to nobility. They're forced to work for no pay and are subject to terrible punishments if they refuse, or even if their masters just take a whim to punish them. In the story, none of the slaves seem to mind this very much, but I assure you that in the really real world, slavery is a real thing that has happened to real people. And it's horrible. It's not something that we should just be casual about or pretend that people are okay with. Also in this story, there is a part where the princess goes to take a bath. She sends word ahead and brings guards to make sure that no one will be there because she doesn't want anyone to see her in the bath where she will be naked. The princess, in addition, is Muslim and doesn't even want anyone to see her face. She wears a veil to preserve her modesty, which some Muslim women even today choose to do. In the story, Aladdin sneaks into the bath to spy on her. He sees her without her clothes or her veil, and he never gets in trouble for it. In the real world, we should respect other people's privacy. If people want to wear heavy clothes, religious clothes, or simply don't want people staring at them regardless of what they choose to wear, we should respect that. We should never spy on people or try to see them naked or uncovered against their will. That is not only incredibly disrespectful, it's illegal. In the real world, if Aladdin had tried to spy on the princess while she was taking a bath, he would have gotten arrested. That was a very bad thing to do. The last moral thing that I want to talk about may be a little bit difficult for the younger members of my audience to understand. It has to do with stereotypes and xenophobia, and these are more complex issues than other moral problems that I have with the story. So it may be important for parents to step in and help explain why these kind of things are problematic. Because you have to have a pretty good grasp on social concepts to understand what a stereotype is or why it would be wrong. There's a character in this story known simply as the Jew. He is a merchant who buys and presumably sells silver. At some point in the story, someone sells him silver and he does not pay them what it is worth. Rather, he gets it as cheap as he possibly can and sells it as high as he possibly can. If you don't understand the context of this, it wouldn't seem problematic at all because that really is the best way to run a store. However, let me put it in context for you and maybe it will become a little more clear. Sherazade, our author and our narrator, is a Muslim woman living in the height of the Persian Empire. During the Persian Empire, Jewish people were looked down on by other people who had religions with higher populations, whereas there were fewer Jewish people. The Jewish people were a minority in the empire. Muslim people were a majority. That just means that there were more Muslim people than there were Jewish people. Now, sometimes people with different religions don't like each other, even today. I personally live in Appalachia, which is a mountain range of the United States, and I see this kind of thing even here, and I'm recording in 2017. People who don't like each other can start to make up stories about each other because they don't have any real problems with the other person, they're just prejudiced. That means that they have no reason to dislike a person, they just do, just out of meanness. One thing that the majority made up about the minority is that they were cheap. And they like to cheat people. Don't sell things to that person, they would say. All Jews will cheat you. These stories weren't true. They just existed because people wanted to pretend that they were true. That way they wouldn't feel bad about hating people for no reason. But they were actually hating people for no reason because these stories were just made up. It wasn't real. So we shouldn't believe Sherazade when she tells us that this Jewish merchant was a bad person because she's just believing false stories that she's heard. And we should never spread these stereotypes or any fake stories, because then people might believe them. And we can spread hate that shouldn't exist at all. We should try to tell the truth when at all possible, and we should never be prejudiced. The last thing I want to talk about isn't a moral issue, it's just something that Sherazade is wrong about. And I don't want my audience to become dumber by listening to these stories. This is about geography. Sherazade doesn't understand geography at all, and the time it takes people to travel distances in her stories make no sense because of it. One of the things she said is that she thinks that Africa is a country, which is about as wrong as a person can get something. Africa is a continent, a huge landmass, the second largest continent on the planet, and there are 54 countries in Africa. Over 1 billion people live in Africa, divided up among these 54 countries. The idea that this entire diverse continent could be a single country is so jarring that it completely took me out of the story. I mean, it's ridiculous. That's like saying the country of North America, except that we're smaller and we have fewer countries. I don't even really have anything to compare it to. I can't imagine that even at the time she was so uneducated as to get it as wrong as she did. And then later she says that a character on a journey went out of Egypt into Africa. I just could not comprehend this statement. Egypt is fairly popular here in the US because they have a fascinating culture, and we've appropriated a lot of it for our horror films. Things like mummies, pyramids, pharaohs, and so forth. I can't remember a time when I didn't know that Egypt was in Africa. There's no possible way to leave Egypt and go into Africa because if you are in Egypt, you are already in Africa. Egypt is a country in the continent of Africa, just like you couldn't walk out of the United States into North America because the United States is a country in the continent of North America. Again, I don't know how she made this mistake, because I can't imagine someone being that uneducated, even in the 1700s. But perhaps I am judging her too harshly because I do have the added bonus of my mandatory education, which included geography. She may not have been so lucky. So this really ties back to what I was talking about how we should be thankful for things we have, even school, which you might not like. Because you may not like it, but getting smarter every day, getting as smart as we can, is very important, because it prevents us from making these kinds of major mistakes. I would be so embarrassed if I was so dumb that I couldn't tell the difference between a continent and a country, and I'm sure you would too. But thankfully, we won't make the same mistakes that Sherazade did, morally or factually. I just wanted my audience to be aware of these things. Now that we've gotten all that out of the way, please enjoy the story. But remember, it's just a fairy tale,